In the fall of 1887, in a nearly empty township in Dakota Territory, an old woman named Rose Ackley began tearing her own house apart from the inside while there was still good weather to live in. She did not repair it. She did not sell it. She pulled the boards off her own back rooms, her parlor, her spare bedroom, the rooms she had raised 4 children in, and with that lumber she built, in the corner of her kitchen nearest the stove, a small, tight box of a room, barely big enough for 2 chairs and a bed, a room inside a room. And when the last of the neighbors, loading their wagon to give up and go, stopped to ask Rose Ackley and her husband why on earth they were making their house smaller in the face of a Dakota winter, instead of getting out while the roads held, Rose Ackley said the thing that township would remember. She said, "We are not going to heat a house this winter. We are going to heat a corner, and a corner will do." By January, the roads would be shut, and the cold would come down that took lives across the whole northern country, and the Ackleys' fine, empty farmhouse would stand dark and frozen solid. And in the one small room in the corner of it, 2 old people the county had given up for dead would be warm. Her husband, Amos Ackley, was 71 that fall and not well, his heart gone weak and his breath short, and he could not have wintered in a cold house, and both of them knew it. And that plain fact was the beginning of everything Rose did. I will tell you their situation the way it was, because the whole of what she did only makes sense against it. The Ackleys had come to that Dakota township 20 years before, when it was filling up with hope and homesteaders, and they had raised their family and buried 1 child and married off the rest. And the children had grown and gone, west and east, to easier country, the way children do. And then the hard years had come to that particular stretch of Dakota, the dry years and the low prices, and one by one the neighbours had given up. The township that had once had a school and a store and 40 families had emptied out until by that fall the Ackleys were nearly the last souls left in it. 2 old people on a proving claim that had outlived its promise, 4 miles from the next occupied house and going on 8 from the little town that was itself half boarded up. Their son wanted them out. Their eldest, Charles, who farmed good land down in Nebraska and had done well, had been writing all summer, and the letters had gone from asking to pleading to something close to ordering. "Sell the claim for what it will bring," the letters said, "or walk away from it if you must, but come down to us before winter, because you cannot, you must not, try to winter up there alone. 2 old people, one of them sick, with no neighbours left and no help within reach if anything goes wrong." It was good sense. It was love. And Rose Ackley would not do it. And I will tell you why she would not, because it matters, and it is not stubbornness, though the whole county called it that. Amos was dying. Not that winter, maybe, but soon. And Rose knew it the way a wife of 50 years knows such things. And Amos knew it too. And what the 2 of them wanted, the one thing they wanted more than safety, was that whatever time Amos had left should be spent on their own ground, in their own place, and not in a back bedroom in a son's house in Nebraska, however kind, being waited on and pitied and made to feel that his life was already over and he was only waiting to be done with it. They had come to that land young and made it theirs, and Rose meant for them to hold it as long as Amos drew breath, and if the problem was the cold, then Rose Ackley, who was a practical woman and had never in her life been beaten by a problem she could put her hands on, would simply solve the cold. The talk, what little there was in an emptying township, was pitying and certain, the way people are certain about the old. The remaining few families, before they too pulled out, shook their heads over the Ackleys. Too proud to go to their son, folks said, and going to freeze for it. 2 old people playing house in a wreck while the country empties around them. When Rose was seen pulling the boards off her own good rooms, the word of it reached the town and came back as proof that the strain had been too much and the old woman had lost her grip, dismantling the home she had loved for 20 years, board by board, like a creature that no longer knew what a house was for. Nobody understood it. It looked like ruin, like an old woman unmaking her own life. Not one of them saw what Rose Ackley saw, which was that a house is not a thing to keep warm. A house is a thing to lose your warmth into, and she did not have warmth to spare. I will tell you the one thing Rose kept at the centre of her small-built room, and then I will let it wait. When she tore the house down to its useful bones, she threw out or stored nearly everything, hard, practical woman that she was. But one thing she carried into the little room and set where she would see it, and it was a mantel clock, an old wooden-cased clock that had been a wedding present, that she and Amos had carried to that claim in the back of the wagon 20 years before, and that had ticked on the parlour mantel every day and night since. She set it on a shelf in the little room and kept it wound. It kept no better time than it ever had, which was poor. It was not kept for the time, and I will come back to it, because in the deep of what came, that clock was doing something for the two of them that had nothing to do with the hour. What Rose Ackley understood, and the township did not, was not complicated, and she would have been the first to say so, being a woman with no patience for making simple things sound grand. She understood that all winter long a person is not really trying to warm the ear. The ear does not care and will not hold it. What a person is trying to do is keep the warmth that comes off their own body from running away faster than the body can make more. That is all being warm is. And a great house with its high ceilings and its many rooms and its long cold walls is a machine for pulling the warmth off a body and carrying it away up the stairs and out through the windows and into all that empty space, so that the stove must burn and burn just to lose it. Two old people with little strength to cut wood and a sick man's weak furnace of a body could never, that winter, have made warmth fast enough to fill a house. But a small room, a tiny room, close-walled and low, packed tight around 2 chairs and a bed, a room that gave the warmth almost nowhere to go. That room could be kept warm by the bodies in it and a little fire, and kept warm, once warmed, with almost nothing at all. Rose was not making her house smaller out of madness. She was building, with her own old hands, a nest, in the truest animal sense of that word. A small, insulated hollow that would hold the heat of the living things inside it. The same wisdom, though she would not have put it so, that packs a wren into a snug hole and a mouse into a ball of grass, and lets both of them live through a cold that would kill them in the open. She said it plain to Amos, the once, when even he questioned whether she ought to be pulling the good house apart. She said, the house was built to hold a family, and she went on prying up a board. There is no family here now. There is you and me, and I can keep you and me warm. And she meant to, and she did. The building of it was where she made her one real mistake, and it nearly cost her, and it taught her the last thing she needed to know. Her first little room she made close and tight, as she meant to, but she made it too tight, and she sealed it too well, walls and ceiling both, with the stove vented through it, and the first cold night she and Amos shut themselves into it, with the fire going and the door closed, and by the middle of the night Amos, whose weak heart already begged for air, was gasping and grey and sick, and Rose, her own head aching and swimming, understood just in time that she had done it too well, that she had built a box so tight that the fire and their own breath had fouled the air past what a sick man could stand, and she got the door open and the good air in before it went worse than it did. It frightened her badly. It was the one time all that autumn her nerves shook, because she saw that her cleverness had nearly smothered the very man she was trying to save. She did not abandon the room. She fixed the flaw, the way a practical woman does once the fright is past. She cut a small vent low by the door and another high in the far wall, so that a slow, quiet current of fresh air moved always through the room, in low and out high, enough to keep the air alive without carrying off the warmth, and she banked and sealed everything else but those 2 knowing little openings. She learned, in other words, the thing every builder of snug shelters must learn, that a living space must breathe, or it will kill you as surely as the cold, and that the whole art is in letting it breathe just enough and no more. After that, the little room was right, and it held its warmth, and its air stayed sweet, and Amos breathed easy in it. By the time the first snow flew, Rose Ackley's strange work was done, and I will tell you honestly what it looked like to the last neighbour who saw it before the roads closed. It looked like the inside of a poor man's shed, built inside the shell of a good house. The fine rooms of the Ackley home stood stripped and empty and closed off, their doors shut against rooms no longer meant to be lived in, going cold. And in the corner of the kitchen, hard by the stove, stood a rough little box of a room, made of salvaged boards, low and cramped and ugly, stuffed with old quilts and straw and rag rug against every wall and overhead, so small that the bed and 2 chairs and the little shelf with the clock nearly filled it, with a curtained low doorway you had to stoop through. It looked like exactly what the township said it was. 2 old people who had given up their home and were huddling in a corner of it like animals, waiting for the winter to finish them. That is what it looked like. What it was the one warm place for 8 miles in any direction, and the only house in that township where 2 people were going to be alive and comfortable in February. The winter, when it came, was one of the bad ones, and Rose had read that it would be, and the signs the old read. The geese had gone over early and high and in a hurry. The muskrats down on the slough had built their houses thick and tall. The Ackley's old dog grew a coat like a bear, and Amos, who had watched Dakota skies for 20 years, said the winter would come hard and stay long, and Rose laid in what she could against it, which was not much, because that was the whole trouble. They had little wood, for Amos could no longer cut it, and Rose could cut only so much at 70, and they had no near neighbour to call on, and no money to hire what they lacked. Everything that winter was going to come down to whether Rose had judged the warmth right, because there was no margin anywhere else. She could not outburn a mistake. She had only exactly as much fuel as 2 old people could gather, and it would either be enough in a room small enough, or it would not be enough, and they would die. There was no third way, and Rose knew it, and built accordingly, and waited. Their son Charles did one more thing before the roads closed, and it is part of the story because it brought the one witness who could tell it. In late November, frightened by his mother's letters, which spoke calmly of a little room and made no sense to him at all, Charles Ackley came up from Nebraska himself, by train and then by hired rig over the last hardening roads, to move his parents out by main force if he had to simply pack them up and take them south before the country closed for the winter. He arrived angry and afraid, and he found his mother pulling the last rag rug into a shed built in the corner of the kitchen, and his father, whom he had come to rescue, sitting warm and easy in a chair by the stove in that little room, better than Charles had seen him look in a year. And Charles Ackley stood in the wreck of his childhood home and told his mother she had lost her mind, and that he was taking them both to Nebraska on the next train if he had to carry them. And Rose Ackley, who loved her son, said no. She said, "Your father wants to die on his own land, Charles, not in your spare room, and I am going to see that he lives here first, as long as he can, and warm. Stay a few days if you don't believe me. Stay and see." And something in how she said it, or how his father looked, made Charles stay. And the storm that closed the roads closed them with him still there. And so it was that Charles Ackley, who had come to save his parents from their folly, spent that winter as the witness to it instead, snowed in with them. And it is from Charles that the county, and I, have the truth of what that little room did. The great cold came down in January, and it was the kind the northern plains get a few times in a lifetime and never forget. I will not give you a false blizzard with drama in it, because that is not what nearly killed people that winter. What nearly killed them was the plains still cold, day upon day of it, 20 and 30 and once nearly 40 below. A cold that did not roar, but simply sat on the country and squeezed, week after week, until the frost drove 4 feet into the ground, and the nail heads in the walls of every house wore fur, and the very timbers cracked like gunshots in the night. It was a cold that found out every weakness in every dwelling in the territory. It found out the draughty places and the thin walls and the far corners, and it filled the fine, empty houses of that emptying township with a cold as complete as the cold outdoors, so that the Ackley's own abandoned parlour, 40 feet from where they slept, stood as frozen as the yard, the ink solid in the bottle on the desk, the last dregs in the coffee pot a disk of ice. The cold did not care that they were old, or that the county had written them off, or that a son had come to take them away. It came for them the way it came for everyone, but it could not get into the little room. Now I will tell you what that winter was in the corner of that house, because Charles Ackley told it the rest of his life, and I had it from a man who had it from him, and it is the heart of the whole thing. The three of them lived in that one small room for 9 weeks, snowed in, and they were warm. Not merely alive, not merely enduring, but warm, comfortably warm, on a fire so small that Charles, who had expected to see his parents feeding a roaring stove around the clock, could not at first believe it. Because the room was so small and so well stuffed with quilt and straw and rug, once the bodies of 3 people and a modest fire had warmed it, it stayed warm on almost nothing, the way a wren's hole or a snow den stays warm, the heat with nowhere to flee to. At night, the 3 of them slept in and around the one bed, close, in the animal way that people forget is the oldest warmth there is, and their own bodies heated the little room while they slept so that the fire could be let down to coals, and the coals were enough. The wood that Charles had thought would not last a fortnight lasted the winter, because Rose Ackley was not heating Dakota, and she was not heating a house. She was heating a box the size of a horse stall, with 3 warm bodies already in it, and against that task, even her little woodpile was enough. I promised I would make the plain sense of it clear, and this is the place. There is no marvel in it, only a truth so plain that comfort had let a whole country forget it. Warmth is not a thing you make once and keep. It is a thing that pours constantly off every living body and is lost. And the only question that matters in a cold country is how fast you lose it. A big house loses it fast, up and away into all that space, and so it demands a great fire and beats a poor man and a sick man and an old man. A small, tight, well-lined room loses it slowly and hands it back and lets the bodies within it be their own stoves. Rose Ackley had not found a way to make more heat. Anyone can make heat with wood enough, and they had no wood enough. She had found a way to keep from losing the heat they already had, the heat that came free off their own living bodies, and that is a thing that costs nothing, and that the strongest furnace in the finest house cannot do if the house is built to throw warmth away. She had shrunk the space she had to keep warm down to the size of the warmth she had to keep it with. That was the whole of it. It is why every animal that lives through a northern winter lives in a hole or a den or a huddle, and never once in a mansion. And Rose Ackley, who had no book learning in it at all, had simply looked at 2 old bodies and a little wood, and done the only arithmetic that added up. Mind, it was not comfort like a story, and it should not be told as if the little room were a cosy miracle with no cost. 9 weeks is a long time for 3 grown people in a room the size of a stall. They were cramped past bearing some days, and short-tempered, and there was no privacy in it and no relief from each other, and the work of it fell hard on Rose, who was the well one, tending the fire and the sick man, and the melting of snow for water and the careful cooking, all in that tiny space, at an age when she had earned her rest. Amos was failing through it all. The room kept him warm, but it could not make him young, and there were nights his breath frightened them. And they were lucky, too, and Rose would have said so. The great cold, for all its length, held off the one storm fierce enough to bury the low vents she needed for air, and had it come at the wrong time, even her cleverness might not have been enough. It was not magic. It was a hard, close, wearing winter, survived by main wisdom and a little grace, which is the most any of them ever got, and more than most of that township got, and enough. The cold broke in March, the way it does, and the snow went off, and Charles Ackley dug out the door of a house in which his mother had kept his father alive and warm through a winter that had killed stronger people and better houses. On a woodpile, Charles had judged good for 2 weeks, and Charles, who had come in November to take his parents away from their madness, went home to Nebraska in the spring, having learned something he did not have words enough to thank his mother for. He had come to rescue the old, and had been shown, instead, that the old woman he had thought was losing her grip had a firmer grip on the one thing that mattered than he or anyone in that county had had. He told it everywhere after. He told it against himself, which is the mark of a man who truly learned a thing. How he had stood in his mother's kitchen and called her mad, and how she had been the sanest of them all. That is the apology that was made, and it was made in public, up and down 2 states for years, by the son who had been wrong. And it was worth more than the private kind, because it taught the lesson onward to everyone who heard it. And people did learn it from them. It is a small thing, and it never got into any book. But in that country, in the hard years, the word went quietly around that if you were caught short of fuel or short of strength, you did not try to hold a whole house against the winter. You shut it down to one room, and you lined that room, and you lived small and close and warm, the way the Ackleys had, and more than one household came through a bad winter on that plain, practical wisdom, passed hand to hand, that an old woman had proved in the corner of a stripped farmhouse when the county thought she had gone mad. She had not invented it. The poor and the old and the animals had always known it, but she had proved it in the worst winter of those years, in front of a son who carried it out into the world. Amos Ackley lived 2 more years, both of them on his own land, in his own place, as he had wanted, and died there in his own bed in a warm room in the winter of his last year, with Rose beside him, which was the whole of what she had torn her house apart to give him, and she gave it. And I will tell you now about the clock, because it is time. Through all those 9 weeks in the little room, Charles said, the old wedding clock ticked on its shelf, keeping its poor time, and his mother wound it every night before the fire was banked, the last thing she did. And he understood that winter, watching her, what the clock was for, and it was not for the hour. In a room the size of a stall, snowed in a cold and a silence that pressed on the mind as hard as it pressed on the body, the small, steady tick of that clock was the sound of ordinary life going on, of time still moving, of a household still keeping its habits, of 2 people who had been married 50 years still marking the days together in their own home and not merely waiting in a hole to be rescued or to die. Rose wound the clock every night because winding the clock was what you did in a home, and she had determined that the little room was going to be a home and not a burrow, and the ticking of that clock in that cramped, warm dark was the difference, and Charles never forgot the sound of it, and neither, once he told it, did anyone who heard. I have carried this story a long time, and I tell it because it is not like the others, the ones about the great storms fought off and the crops saved. Nobody's crop was saved here, and no great fortune, and no town. It is only about 2 old people the world had counted out, and the plainest, humblest, oldest wisdom there is, which the strong and the comfortable forget, and the weak and the wise remember, that you cannot always make more warmth, but you can almost always stop wasting the warmth you have, if you are willing to live small enough to hold it. Rose Ackley could not heat a house, so she did not try. She heated a corner, and a corner did, and she kept her husband on his own land and warm to the end of him, and wound the clock every night, and that is not a small thing to have done, whatever the county thought while she was doing it. It is, I have come to believe, very nearly the whole of what love and sense together can do against a hard world, which is to shrink the space you must defend down to the size of the strength you have to defend it, and to hold that, and to keep the clock wound. Now this couple is ours, but here is what is true. As the dry years emptied parts of the Dakota plains, aging homesteaders really were left behind on failing claims as their neighbors and grown children moved on, and the northern winters killed the isolated and the ill-prepared, with cold as much as with storms. The wisdom in this story is real and old and sound. Heating a single, small, well-insulated room, rather than a whole house, is a genuine and effective way to survive a hard winter on little fuel, because warmth is lost to the space it must fill, and a smaller, lined space holds body heat far longer, which is the same principle by which every denning animal survives the cold. And a sealed room must be given ventilation, low and high, or the fire and the breathing within it will foul the air dangerously, exactly as nearly happened here. The people and the township are imagined. The killing cold and the humble, life-saving sense of heating the corner and not the house are exactly as they were.